Okay, the purpose of this video is to discuss the identity of the two Miyaldot. We are told that after his earlier plans failed, finally Paro summons in the Miyaldot HaIvriot, who are named Shifra and Pua. Now, who exactly are these Miyaldot HaIvriot? We look over here, we're told in English these are the Hebrew midwives. That's a good way to translate Miyaldot HaIvriot. What does that mean, Hebrew midwives? So, one possible way of interpreting it is midwives who themselves are Hebrews. Alternatively, it could be midwives who perhaps serve in Hebrew communities, or called Hebrew midwives because professionally they work with Hebrew women. So we in class looked at a couple of different interpretations. First, we noticed that in Midrashic literature, these women are identified with women from Moshe's family. Over here, we didn't do this source in class, but this is the Targum Yerushalmi, the Targum of Eretz Israel, interprets it as one of them was named Shifra, who was Yocheved, and the other one was Pua, who was Miriam. And similarly in class, we saw this was part of a lengthier discussion in the Gemara. On the sheet that I handed out, we had the text of the Gemara, where we're told that Rav Shmuel Chad Amar Isha Ubita, Chad Amar Kala V'chamota. Rav and Shmuel had a debate. We don't know who exactly said what, but one of them, Chad, one of them said these two midwives were a mother and daughter, and the other one said these two midwives were a daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. So which woman are we talking about? Manda Amar Isha Ovita, the one who said it was a mother and daughter, namely Yocheved and Miriam. Right, the specific mother and daughter is Yocheved, Moshe's mother, and Miriam, her daughter, Moshe's sister. Manda Amar Kala V'chamota, the view that says there was a step, so daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, Yocheved ve'Elisheva. Again, one of them was Yocheved, Moshe's mother, and the other one was Elisheva, who married Aaron. And Gemara cites earlier sources to support the idea that Shifra, Pua, Yocheved, and Miriam. Now, we pointed out, if we take this literally as an attempt to give historical information, it's very problematic. Yocheved is herself a woman of childbearing age here, so it's entirely plausible she could have been a midwife. But as for the second midwife, Pua, being either Miriam or Elisheva, it's very hard to imagine that. After all, Miriam is presented as this girl when Moshe is born. It's considered so amazing that she looks out for him and helps Yocheved the way she does. You don't get the impression from the psukim that she's that much older than Moshe. And so it's hard to imagine she would have been old enough to be a professional midwife. And Elisheva, for sure, we know that Elisheva married Aaron. Now, Aaron was 3 years older than Moshe. So in the story where there's this decree on Hebrew babies, Moshe is born. So Aaron is 3 when the story is happening. It's highly improbable he would have been married to Elisheva. And whether Elisheva was married to him or not, it's hard to imagine how she could have been much older than 3 either. Right? And a wife could be older than a husband by a little bit. She could be 4, 5, 6 if Aaron was 3. But how could she really be more than that? It's hard to imagine her being a 20-year-old woman who's working in the professional world, then she marries a guy 17 years younger than her. And so we suggested there may be certain things at play here other than an attempt at literal history. First of all, the Midrash may be driven in part by this general tendency that some have referred to as the conservation of biblical characters, which we mean that often when the Tanakh has well-known figures like, let's say, Miriam and Yocheved, and then in the same time and place it mentions other figures who seem to be completely anonymous, or maybe we have their name but we know almost nothing else about them. There's a tendency among certain of the Tanaim and Amoraim in the Midrash to always try to identify the unknown figure with a known figure. So just to give a couple of examples, in this past week's Parsha, at the end of the War of the 4 Kings and 5 Kings, a guy named Melchizedek comes and brings gifts to Abraham. We never heard of this Melchizedek guy before. We don't hear of him again afterwards. So there's a view in the Midrash that he's the same person as Noach's son, Shem. So Melchizedek seems like a great guy in the story. He gives gifts to Abraham and blesses Abraham in God's name. Noach's son Shem seems like a really great guy, in the story right after the Mabul, where Noach got drunk and Shem covered him up very respectfully. And so the Midrash tends to associate people like that. I think in class we gave the example of the Mekosher Sheitzim, the guy who's gathering wood on Shabbos, who doesn't have a name. And we know around the same time the daughters of Tzlafchad mention how their father Tzlafchad died because of some private sin of his. And so Chazal put two and two together, according to one view, that Tzlafchad is that guy who's gathering wood. And that's what it means he died of his own sin. So there is this trend in general to take obscure figures. Here, Shifra and Pua, we know they're great people. We know nothing else about them other than that they're midwives who saved babies. And so to associate them with Yocheved and Miriam, who are better known women of the same time and place, is something Midrashim are inclined to do. But it's always more convincing when you see a deeper meaning behind it. So we suggested a further deeper meaning that our first encounter with Yocheved and Miriam is going to come in the next chapter, in Perek Bet. And in Perek Bet, we encounter Yocheved and Miriam basically risking their own lives in order to save Moshe. Right? We're told about first how when Moshe's mother Yocheved can't do anything more to hide him, she comes up with this whole idea with the basket that she's going to put in the reeds in the marsh, and his sister, meaning Miriam, sort of hides out from a distance to see what's going to happen, and she comes up with the whole idea of finding a nursing mother from the midwives, who ends up being Em Hayala, the kid's mother, Yocheved. So our first encounter with Miriam and Yocheved is all about Miriam and Yocheved going that extra mile to save a Hebrew baby. Granted, it was their own baby, Moshe, but that may be part of what the Midrash is doing here, to connect the different women who were involved in that heroism, Miriam and Yocheved in the specific case of baby Moshe, and then Shifra and Pua with the babies of the entire Jewish people. So we looked at the Meforshim here, and we saw that Rashi, Kedarko, as he tends to do, Rashi follows the lead of the Midrash here, and of the views in the Midrash, takes what seems to be the more compelling one, that's a little closer to the text, right? So he says Shifra is Yocheved, and Pua is Miriam. Again, that seemed to be the view the Gemara endorsed more at the end. And as we mentioned, the idea of Pua being Elisheva is particularly problematic, since it's hard to imagine how 3-year-old Aaron could have had anything to do with Elisheva yet at this point. So Rashi prefers that other view, Yocheved and Miriam, still one of these views from the Gemara. Along comes the Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, and we've mentioned before that Rashi's grandson Rashbam saw his role as giving sort of the simple pshat alternatives that Rashi himself would have given to the Midrash had Rashi lived long enough. And so he knows that his grandfather simply adopted what it said in the Midrash here, but he prefers a different approach. So he says about these miyaldot ivriot something very simple. What does it mean, miyaldot ivriot? Miyaldot shehem ivriot. I think in some texts it says shehen instead of shehem. Either way, miyaldot who were ivriot. He says it's women who were Hebrews, because as we said, the phrase Hebrew midwives is ambiguous. It could mean midwives who themselves were Hebrews, or midwives who served the Hebrew community, but maybe themselves were not Jewish. Maybe they just lived in the Jewish neighborhood, and so they helped all the Jewish women there have babies. So Rashbam is weighing in on that issue and saying these were Hebrew women of Hebrew descent, but not necessarily Yocheved and Miriam. It's two random women from among the Jewish people. Abarbanel then comes along, and Abarbanel doesn't like this whole approach. Let's open up this handout over here. Along comes the Abarbanel. He says, with all due respect to everyone here, including Rashi and Rashbam, I don't think what any of them said makes sense. These were not Hebrews. How on earth could Paro trust in his heart, meaning like let his heart trust, put his trust in Hebrew women, Jewish women that are going to kill their own kids? How on earth is Paro trusting these midwives? See, we all read the story and see how the midwives saved the babies, and we say, yeah, it makes sense they were Jewish, because they saved the babies. But Paro thought they wouldn't save the babies. How is he dumb enough to fall for that? Says the Abarbanel, Hayu Mitzriot Mialdot Ivriot. It's talking about Egyptian women who's helped Hebrew women. Mialdot Ivriot, meaning Hebrew midwives in the sense of midwives who serve the Hebrew community. Ozrot Otan Laledet. And so what happened is these Mialdot were Mitzriot, they were Egyptian. That's why Paro thought they would listen to him. But Yaru et Elokim lo asu davar mimah shetzivah Natan Melech Mitzrayim. To Paro's surprise, these midwives feared God and didn't do what he commanded them. So this is a well-known debate here. Rashbam and Abarbanel within the realm of Pshat, where we don't know who the women are. Should we assume they were Hebrews? Because otherwise, why did they save the babies? Or should we assume they're Egyptians? Because otherwise, why would Paro trust them and think they'd kill the babies? So we pointed out a couple of things here. We pointed out Rashbam is not a fool. Rashbam surely thought of the fact that it's kind of strange that Paro trusts them. If they're Jewish women, why are they going to kill their own babies? But Rashbam probably figured that Paro made his calculation that they'll be scared of getting caught. Now, in the short term, they can't get caught, right? In the short term, Paro is telling them to try and do this in a sneaky, underhanded way, right? That just look, when the kid's born, if it's a boy, kill it, if it's a daughter, save it. And so they're supposed to do this in this discreet way, secretive way, where no one's going to know what's going on. So in the short term, Paro has no way of knowing if they are obeying him or not, because he can't very well send in policemen or soldiers to monitor them. Then the whole plan would no longer be a secret. But in the long term, they are going to get found out. In the long term, Paro is going to notice if eventually the Jewish male population keeps growing, he's going to know they're not doing what he told them to do. And in fact, that's what happens. They protect these babies. But then what happens? Paro summons them in. Paro calls them in and says, why did you do this? Why did you keep the babies alive? And so Rashbam may be thinking, look, the reason he thought they would listen is because he thought they're going to eventually be found out, which is true because they eventually were found out. And he thought the threat of being found out could even prompt Jewish women to kill their own babies. On the other hand, so Barbanel does have a point that Paro would have been even more likely to trust them to kill the babies if they were not Jewish. And a question that's sometimes asked against the Barbanel, though, is, wait a minute, but it says they feared God. In those days, most non-Jews, basically all non-Jews, were pagans. So if these women feared Elokim, if they feared God, doesn't that prove that they were Jewish? So here we took a look at Shadal, Samuel David Luzzatto. We have that lovely photo of him over there that we discussed, whether he looks more like an accountant or an investment banker. Shadal lived in the 1800s in Italy, and we're reading the translation here from Italian, where he points out that there were those who thought these midwives were of Israelite stock, right? We mentioned Rashbam, Onkelos, Chazal, and then he throws in some more modern sources, Mendelssohn and Rosemuller. Then there were others, both ancient and modern. Right? Jerome was a church father, so you have this ancient Christian, you've got Josephus, this ancient Jew, and then you've got a Barbanel, all of whom are saying they're Egyptians, and Shadal agrees with them, right? That seems likely, because again, how could Paro command the Israelite women to kill all their sons without suspecting that they somehow would reveal the matter? It's interesting the way he puts it, right? And maybe they wouldn't be able to, maybe he didn't think they would save the babies, but he should have at least thought that they would, somehow try to leak the story so Paro would have to kill the plot. And Shadal says, insofar as this claim that because they feared God, they had to be Israelite, he says that's no claim at all, because it says they feared Elokim, not Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. And Elokim is the generic name for God, not the unique name of Hashem. And so any decent human being who's a God-fearing human being can be called Yirei Elokim. We cited several psukim to back this up. Excuse me. Let's get that other file open over here. We noted, for example, Avram says to Avimelech, I thought you'd kill me and take my wife. That's why I said she was my sister, because I thought you lack Yirat Elokim. The implication is, if they're the type of non-Jews who have any morals, answer to any sort of supreme being, then they're called Yirei Elokim, and they would not hurt his wife. Similarly, not hurt him to take his wife. When Yosef lets his brothers out of jail, he says, you guys relax, that's Elokim ani yareh, I fear God. Now, Yosef's brothers don't know he's Yosef now, they think he's a non-Jewish Egyptian, and saying, I fear Elokim, doesn't give away his identity, because Yirat Elokim just means being a decent moral person. And on the other hand, Amalek, who are so evil, they're called being evil because they did not fear God. Lo Yareh Elokim. And Eov, who it seems was not a Jewish guy, he lived in the land of Uz, not the land of Israel, he's also called Yirei Elokim.